graduate school, I got to take a position at the Gregory Academy of Art there. And the reason I chose Amsterdam was because there's a world-renowned lace maker who lives in Amsterdam. She's not associated with the school, but she works there and has lived there for 90 years almost. So I got a chance to work with her for about 6 months and learn a lot about Dutch laces. Lace has been kind of a conceptual foundation in my work for a long time, but until this past year, I hadn't actually used the textile in the sculptures. It was much more kind of referencing or thinking through the theories of it. So this piece here is made up of 5 different handmade laces that are supporting the weight of cast concrete. And they're all torsion bobbin lace, which is a form of textile that you control each thread individually. And the work has been really thinking a lot about material and material meaning, and sort of the associations our culture embeds in the everyday materials around us. So lace, for example, is something that's thought of as really delicate and fragile. It's ornamental and additive. It's a non-essential, essentially. Whereas concrete is something that is structurally a foundation to our architectural systems. So this piece is inverting those stereotypes and using the lace as the support structure instead of vice versa. The title of the piece is "How Many of Those Who Are Yoked Together Have Ever Seen Oxen?", which is a passage from a Gertrude Stein novel that I was reading at the time in Amsterdam. And I think it has a lot of different meanings for me personally, but most essentially it's the this passage kind of stuck with it because it's embodying her words in a way. It's kind of asking, have you noticed this yoke that you're bridling? Do you see the forest through the trees? Do you understand where these associations are coming from? And hopefully, through the work I make, I'm trying to push through to either understand those associations better or invert the stereotypes in some way. Like I said, I've been using lace for a long time as kind of a conceptual foundation, and my interest has been, or my theory around the work has been that the negative space of the cloth or the textile is actually more activated or more important than the thread or the patterning of the material itself. It's sort of this filter or this veil that activates the other side. The gaze can go through and kind of eroticize or give you more information about what's on the other side of the cloth than what the cloth is itself. So while I was in Amsterdam, I kind of hosted a series of interviews with people who are also using translucency or this negative space in these ways. So I interviewed lace makers, glass makers, and sex workers in Amsterdam's red light district. So as you can imagine, these conversations were really different from one another, but they all had the same underlying ideas of power and sexuality and sexiness. And of course, the red light district, the sex workers were the most interesting, and they're actually utilizing this space the most. They're standing behind glass windows or glass doors, often wearing lacy negligees or less than that, and trying to sort of entice the passersby, and both objectifying their bodies as well as being at this point of power, which I found really beautiful and poignant. So it's that negative space or that translucency that I'm trying to define in this next sculpture. And this is a torsion lace pattern that I've then built out into a 3-dimensional geometry, sort of using the steel to define and outline the negative spaces that I'm studying. And then behind is a series of cyanotype prints which I've been using a lot in my studio lately. It's, if you don't know, it's a photographic process where you paint a photosensitive emulsion onto a surface, and then by exposing through an object, the negative space turns blue and then the positive stays white. And in this series, it's actually studying the negative space within my studio. So again, comparing it to architecture and the phenomenological studies of an interior of a space. So these become more like color fields that we can view the negative space of the sculpture through. Yeah. And then the two-dimensional or wall works that I have are sort of curating I'm thinking about them as curating the conversation a little bit. So this, I want to call it a diptych, even though I'm not sure if that's like an official thing I can call it. But this piece here is a photograph of the Smith and Ninth Street station, which is the subway next to my studio, and a tapestry. So I walk by this construction site every day and kind of realize that it's embodying a lot of the things that I'm trying to play with in my studio, where the scaffolding is building out this three-dimensional lace structure, and then the netting is sort of, obviously very lace-like in textile. And comparing that to the tapestry, which is a weaving that, unlike lace, it's a loom-controlled textile. So trying to compare these two things and also contrast them. So they're really similar structurally, but also opposites of one another in function and texture and emotion and associations and so on. And then lastly, these pieces on the back wall kind of happened last and more gesturally. Along the way of this research, the conversation came up about material and what is handmade versus man-made, or artificial versus organic. And so I felt like the latex is really adding to that conversation and confusing that a bit, where the handmade is now the concrete, whereas that was something that was originally the man-made. And then the latex, which is this thing that's more pliable and textile-y, is now the artificial, where the, yeah. So, do you guys have any questions?
Can you tell us a little bit about your color choices?
Yeah, like I said, I've been working on this body of work since being back in New York, and my studio is in Red Hook, which is like on the waterfront of Brooklyn. And it's a really cool location because it's an old shipping area where they used to receive a lot of material for the city. And so it has these color palettes that are really both construction sites, these like really bright oranges, and then it's on the water, so we have these blues, and then you also have these incredible rusts of the steel there that is becoming, like, making its way back to being more organic materials. The area I'm in was also really devastated by Hurricane Sandy, so there's a lot of construction that's being taken back and kind of grown over, and so I think that's where the palette comes from.
Can you talk a bit about your process of casting the concrete? Because you put a lot of time and thought into that, and I'd like to hear more about that.
Yeah, so again, it's kind of thinking about what is the positive and what is the negative, and to cast these tubes, it's more of a series of layers, so different sand combinations or aggregate combinations layered up, and then at some moments there is negative space where the gravel didn't actually connect all the way, that I was really kind of satisfied with.